Hi there, everyone. I'm Ani Anderson, CEO of New Health, Director of Operations at the Somatic Coaching Academy. And I'm super excited for our conversation today with our Director of Education, Brian Trzaskos, about the ego. Hi, Brian.
Hey, Ani, how are you?
Good, good, good. So, whether you're with us live or you're watching the recording, we encourage you to like our page, subscribe to our channel so that you get these live streams and you can join in on the conversation. So let's hop into it, Brian. The ego's got kind of a bad reputation sometimes in the personal development or the spiritual space. There are certainly people who believe that we should really be looking to eradicate our ego. I think this is a super fun conversation, and it's a conversation, actually, like many conversations, where I really enjoy listening to both sides of this conversation and how I'm just really interested in like how people think about things. One of my favorite people in the spiritual personal development space is Dr. Wayne Dyer.
Mhm.
And I remember him talking about ego being edging God out. And like I said, I love listening to him and others talk about this topic. So let's just talk for a second. Tell us a little bit about how you think about the ego so that we can develop a frame of reference for where we're going to have this conversation.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's a whole spectrum of things. And one of the things I was going to mention Wayne Dyer also, Ani, in one of his later books, I don't remember exactly what book it was, but he actually said, at this point in my life, I feel like ego needs to be eradicated. And I was like, wow, I was really taken aback by that because, someone like Wayne Dyer, you don't hear him say those kinds of things. Very often, like that type of something needs to be eradicated. I don't think I'd ever heard, I listened to so many of his teachings and read so many of his books, and I had never heard him use that kind of language before, and I was kind of a little like shocked by it, actually. So anyway, just what you're saying, you see people all over the spectrum of this idea of ego. So and then you have other people like, the Freudian definitions who created the whole concept of
Yeah.
super id and ego, or super ego and id kind of stuff. So kind of where I land on this, I'm a huge fan. The work that we do at the Somatic Coaching Academy, we do a lot of the work based in bioenergetics. That's where a lot of the work that we do is based in. So, I think about things like Alexander Lowen has been a big influence in the way that I think about these things, because we're also talking about the soma and the body, our physicality, and how that relates to things. And, much like Lowen, who talks about the ego as really being the mediator between what happens inside of us and outside of us.
Hmm.
And I really like the way that he talks about that. And that the ego, as long as we're in human form, we're going to experience the ego in some way. Because when we think about it that way, the ego becomes our self-image, not only the way we identify ourselves, but the way we form and create reality is kind of the ego's function. So the ego isn't bad by any means. I think in a lot of ways, the ego it's really necessary for us to not only be the humans we are now, but also necessary for us to become the humans that we're becoming,
Hmm.
be able to evolve. And some people talk about transcending the ego, and I think there's something to that also, especially in the work that we do.
So I want to say this so that I don't forget it, and maybe we'll come back and maybe we won't. I think that it's really interesting that Wayne Dyer was saying at this point in my life or this point in my development. And I think that's a curious thing about being a human being, because we do have this trajectory over the course of a lifetime, which of course we change our opinions or different things become applicable and important for us depending on the stage of our life. And so that actually makes me think about what you were talking about the soma, because our bodies change. And as our bodies change and we develop, different things become important. So I wanted to make sure that I said that, because that's one thing that's going around in my mind. But as you started to talk about bioenergetics, and I love this idea about the intermediary kind of idea, bioenergetics really talks about how we have a certain body, I'm just going to say body type for a moment, like body type, like the way our body is in the world so that we can work out certain energy. And so let's talk about that for a second, because it seems to me that the ego concept would actually be really important as we're here to work out certain energy within the context of our container of our body.
Yeah, well, ego is really, it's really, I guess, in alignment with or correlated with our personality or persona, if you think about it, like that. And the way we can think about it is that our bodies have drives, right? Our soma is one with nature. So if you look at any animal out there running around, like they are fully in their soma. They're fully in their somatic experience, and they are living their lives through intuitive senses. They're intuiting the energies of the world. I think about birds, like, like birds migrate thousands of miles every year. A butterfly, like 3,000 miles. Like, how the heck are they doing that? They don't
Little hummingbirds. What
Yes,
the heck?
they're not like looking at their GPS that they built, and like they're not thinking, I've got to take a left turn, I better stop in there because they've got a better price on gas, and then I'm going to stop at that hotel. They're not doing, they're like fully in their intuitive somatic experience and in touch with nature, completely in complete flow in line with nature. Now, we're exactly the same way as humans. Our somatic experience, somatically, our soma is in complete harmony and flow with nature until, right? Until our ego development misaligns it. And our ego is developed usually typically at a very early age. We learn, we are indoctrinated with belief systems. We learn lessons, what's safe, what's not safe, what's good, what's not good, what we value, what we don't value, and the family and the societal systems that we come up with. And one of the basic ways to talk about this is that we learn what's right or wrong, right? I mean, and I'm put
Yeah.
that in quotes, right? Because like what's right for everybody is not right for everybody. What's wrong for everybody is not wrong for everybody. But in our familial system, we learned what's right and what's wrong. And in the natural flow of energy that comes through our body, like a child having a temper tantrum, for instance, right? So that's a natural flow experience. But if we're taught that temper tantrums are bad and wrong, then what we start to do consciously, then is choke off the impulse to express that energy. So our body's in full expression of the energy, but consciously we choke it off. And through the repetitive conscious choking off of the energy, that process goes from a conscious process to an unconscious process, and that's how we develop that egoic persona. Because now our ego has a plan or a map around what's right or wrong, and completely woven in with it is an energetic either allowing or choking that occurs with it. So now our persona has been woven into our soma. And now, much to your point, what we learn and how we learn it and who we're in relationship with and the different lessons we learn will choke off that energy in different ways in our bodies. And so we have all kinds of different body types of people. We have like tall, skinny, thin people. We have short, rounder people. We have people that have really tight backs and they stand up really straight. We have the people that sink down, sort of thing. And is this genetics? Well, I mean, genetics from the standpoint that sure we have genes passed on, but we're also learning these things from the people who have those genes. So
Totally.
nature nurture deal. But then we start looking at people's body types. We really start understanding, if we really understand how to read body types, we can pretty quickly and usually very, very accurately start to understand what that person's belief systems are, what their ego structure is based on where the energy is choked off in their body. And that shows up as what their soma looks like.
That is so fascinating. I love talking about it. I love learning about it. I love watching it. And as listening to you talk, it reminds me so much of the natural law of polarity, Brian, because I think that there's a lot of different ways to look at this, but you were talking about right or wrong, and you were talking about the things that we learned they and also the things that we're just kind of born in with, and so our spirituality versus our conditioning, and there's so many different laws of polarity kinds of things here, and I think that really is one of the things that I like to remember when we're having a conversation like this one about what do I do about that ego. Is it bad or is it good? And so from a concept of the natural laws, like nothing's bad or good, right or wrong inherently, it is a part of us. So instead, why don't we look at integration?
Yeah.
Right. So, which again, back to Wayne Dyer's kind of comment about eliminating or eradicating, I think he said the
Yeah.
ego later in life. I think that's kind of like interesting
Mhm.
because we're talking about integration and how are we integrating the ego and really becoming aware of the different ways that it shows up and integrating that into who we really are and our external environment or internal environment, all of those different things.
Mhm.
So, what is one way that you see that people get really hung up as they're attempting to integrate ego? What is one way that you see that people kind of get hung up and stumped with this?
Yeah, well, first of all, thinking it's bad and fighting it. So we see aspects of our persona or our personalities that continue to thwart our desires, our progress moving forward. And so we try to compartmentalize the ego or destroy it or eradicate it or eliminate it, those sorts of things. Well, and theoretically, I think if we could do that, might then we just be in full flow expression of our soma all the time. I'm not sure that's great either, right?
Right.
As human beings, as adult human beings, there is a certain capacity to be able to modulate our internal states in a way where it's functional in society, sort
Right.
of, right?
Functionality is important.
So, so I think I see people get hung up by trying to push ego away or trying to compartmentalize it, and by doing that alone, we actually start getting wrapped up in its story. That's why I like the idea of transcending ego, because when we transcend ego, it's more like we're actually hovering above the ego, and we're able to look at how we view and filter the world. Now I see how I'm seeing the world. Now I see how Brian sees the world. Now I see how Brian's persona and personality sees and filters the world. And I can begin to there's another great saying from many spiritual texts, but it's to be in the world but not of it.
Hmm.
And that's kind of where I come from with this, because as human beings, we're going to be in the world. I mean,
Yeah.
we're in the world right now, but it doesn't mean you have to be of the world. But to be in the world, you have to know how to um, use your ego as a deft and capable mediator between what goes on inside of you and what goes on outside of you.
So
And
go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, and I think the best way we do that is to be able to transcend it to the degree where we are as a light being or as at a higher level of consciousness, using our ego, and our ego is not using us.
Yeah, I like the idea of transcendence because it reminds me a little bit of the idea of spiritual bypassing. Transcendence to me, as we're talking about it, is I have gone through the information or the circumstances, the situations, and I've looked at all perspectives and I've integrated so I can see the whole. Really, to me, that's as you're talking about transcendence. That's what it sounds like, and what it's felt like from my own personal experience and walking other people through the experience too. Whereas the concept of spiritual bypassing is like, how do I go around so that I can look from above without having to go through it all?
Yeah.
Whereas transcendence to me speaks a little bit more to going through, not spiritual bypassing, so that you can really see the whole. And you can't see the whole until you've gone through those parts. Yeah.
Oh yeah, most definitely. And I think when it comes back to somatics, right? Because we're really so here at the when we talk about somatics at the Somatic Coaching Academy. What the heck are we doing? Really, what we're doing is we're helping people to tap into their that the natural laws as they exist in their bodies, because our bodies, again, are always in alignment with those natural processes. And those natural processes have been in existence for millions and millions and millions of years. So they are well honed to adapt to anything that happens in our lives, right? They've gotten us this far. Those instinctual processes, I would argue that, and this is, I think, why the ego gets a bad rap, is that as human beings, I think most of the trouble we've gotten into is because we've actually depended on our belief systems to a dysfunctional degree.
Hmm. Yeah,
Right?
especially over the past, few hundred years or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So we're really in a time where we're reclaiming our human wisdom.
Mhm.
And I think that's one of the things that's so important about somatics is to remember that I know we'd like to forget it sometimes, but we're human. We have bodies. These bodies are the containers with which we're living our lives. And so I think that's one of the reasons why we're saying so important.
Yeah, yeah, most definitely. And we have an animal nature. I mean,
Yeah,
we're animals,
yeah,
and
and that's okay.
yeah, and actually, that's a huge gift of us,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
again, you think what's happening on the globe right now, like the animals are not like screwing up the globe
yeah,
right now.
right.
Us brilliant humans are the ones that are creating catastrophes all over the place, but animals aren't. So for so long, we've actually used our egos to suppress those natural responses in our bodies. And I really think it's gotten us in trouble. And just one more thing about the ego, we can say, well, I'm going to become a spiritual being and I'm going to become a wisdom or a sage advisor, a sage wisdom. And you're still using your ego, actually. If you're
Mhm.
identifying yourself as something, then that is by nature, by definition, what your ego is doing, right? By using it as an identifier. I'm not saying that's bad or good.
No.
I'm just saying that's how important that the ego is in our experience.
So speaking of egos and speaking of animals, if you're with us live or at the recent watching of this recording, it's the holiday season. And lots of people are going to be around a bunch of belief patterns and conditioning and ego or making a joke about the animals like here we go into the holidays, right? um and then in all seriousness, I think that the time that we live in has been very challenging for folks as belief systems have become more pronounced and perhaps divided
Mhm.
with people that we love, whether they're friends or family or whatever. And so, Brian, I'd love for us to just leave those that are watching with a tip, a technique, a little bit of hope, something that they can keep in mind as they're navigating what could potentially be seen as ego coming up within themselves or within other people as they're navigating conversations and situations, specifically
Mhm.
around the holidays.
Yeah, so you're right. This is a great time of year to practice these things, like becoming aware of what's going on inside of us, and attentive to what's going on in other people. I think that there's a ninja move that you could do here when we're in conversations with people that um, we don't, we have different belief systems, let's say. Well, by the way, same way, we could actually be locked in the same belief. You can have two people that grow up in a family and they have a belief around being right, right? And
Yeah, right.
they might have different ideas about what that means, but
Yeah,
they're fighting, against against one another. But really, the underlying belief system is I'm right, which means you have to be wrong, and you're wrong, which means I
yeah.
have to be right, kind of thing, right? And that create loggerheads. But I think the ninja move is don't so much listen to what the person is saying. Pay attention to what the natural responses are underneath what they're saying. Pay attention to what's really going on for that person underneath. And you have to pay attention for yourself too. What's going on underneath of what I'm saying? Like I might believe that vaccines are great, and I'm talking with someone who believes that vaccines are like horrible kind of thing in the world. But I almost guarantee both of us underneath that argument are feeling the same way internally. That's what I would like to have people pay attention to. Let's look at the common ground that internally both of us are experience something on a somatic level that is getting stuck in our system someplace, and it's not really allowing for the full expression of what it is that would actually bring more hope into the world.
I really love that you are talking about this. I was just talking to a client about this week. They're having a really difficult time with a family member, and I was encouraging them to really listen less about to the words. Don't listen so much to the words that are being spoken, and see if you can listen and pay attention and become aware of being in conversation in other ways. And it was really transformative because they were in conversation with this person who was very challenging to communicate with, and they were recognizing the similarities. So thank you so much for bringing that up. That's really a beautiful message to leave us with for this conversation around the holidays. Thanks so much, Brian. It's really
Yeah,
cool.
fun.
That's really
Thanks for
cool.
having
Yeah. So, whether you're watching us live or watching the recording, whether you're watching on YouTube, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, we would love for you to like or subscribe the page so you can get notifications about when we are live next. We also love to hear your thoughts, wisdom, insights, questions, and opinions. So, go ahead and put those in the comments below. Happy holidays. It's the holiday season, and we'll see you real soon.
Happy
Thanks. Bye
holidays,
bye.
everyone. Bye bye.